Hello, I'm Pat Keating. I'm in a UCLA Phonetics Lab sound booth in November 2025 to record an interview for the IPA. And helping me do that is Jody Kreiman, my IPA and linguistics colleague. Uh, and I guess I've been asked to do this because I was the secretary of the IPA from 2011 to 2015, and then president until 2019. So I was born in Philadelphia. My family was from Salem, New Jersey, in very South New Jersey. My dad was a student at Drexel in Philadelphia, so I was born there then, but immediately they moved back to Salem. But I don't remember New Jersey. I grew up outside Boston, mostly in Framingham, Massachusetts. Let's see, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, including 4 years in a all girls Catholic high school. And then I went to Wellesley College. And I guess that leads to the next question. So, back in my day in school, I knew I wanted to go into linguistics. I was really fortunate to have in high school a teacher. I don't remember even what she was teaching, but I was talking to her about what I enjoyed, and I told her I really enjoyed language classes, but I really only liked the first year when you found out how the language worked. And I was less interested in going on to read the literature or think about traveling to the countries to use those languages. And she said, "Oh, that's called linguistics." And the weird thing is, I just believed her. I just took this at face value. Okay, I'm going to go in linguistics. I'm going to be a linguist. At that time, the most common path into linguistics, I would say, was from foreign language study, very different from today. It was also very rare to have undergraduate degrees in linguistics, uh, at least in small liberal arts colleges like the one I went to. So at Wellesley, I studied languages. It also happened that linguistics at Wellesley, to the extent there was any, was in the Slavic department, Russian department, because one of the professors there had been a student of Roman Jakobson, and so was part of that strong tradition of Slavic linguistics. So I took all the linguistics courses that I could, including going to MIT. Wellesley had an exchange program with MIT, and I took intro linguistics from Jim Harris at MIT as an undergrad. But otherwise, I was just taking whatever there was at Wellesley and taking languages. I'm embarrassed to mention those languages because 50, 40 years on, I really don't know any languages anymore. But at the time, I was an avid studier of languages. How did I come to specialize in phonetics? Well, when I went to grad school, I went to Brown University, and I had been advised to go there by my linguist professor at Wellesley because it was a good place for Slavic linguistics. And so my plan was to do Slavic phonology. That lasted very little time. In my first semester, I took experimental phonetics, instrumental phonetics, with Phil Lieberman, who was, like me, brand new in the department at Brown. And that was just such an amazing course that it really turned me right away out of Slavic phonology and into experimental phonetics. Um, I guess it's worth saying, maybe at this point, that I had not previously been interested in phonetics because from the introductory books I had read, I had the impression that phonetics was kind of finished, that it was done. Everybody had figured out everything there was to know, and there weren't open questions, except maybe insofar as a language that had not yet been studied might yield a new unknown sound. but that would be expected to be pretty rare. So I thought of phonetics, as I had been exposed to it, as foundational, well understood material. And what the instrumental phonetics course did was show me that there were just a million unanswered questions. And Phil Lieberman was really good at making beginning students feel that they could make a contribution to the field without spending years to acquire very broad expertise, that we could dive in and just already start understanding something that people hadn't looked at already. And that was, of course, heady stuff for a first year grad student. So experimental phonetics it was. Okay, well, Phil Lieberman early on, but my advisor in grad school was actually Sheila Bloomstein, who was doing acoustics and perception. And what I really admired about Sheila was her very level-headedness, her systematic approach to doing experiments. It just seemed a very firm basis for graduate education with Sheila. Other Another faculty member who was influential in my development was Elon Drescher, who was in the department as the phonologist, a generative phonologist. And he really helped me see that phonetics could speak to questions of grammar, and phonetics could be part of a system of grammar because you could ask, well, if the phonology can only do such and such, how can the phonetics then do the rest of whatever that work is? So that was not Sheila's approach at all to phonetics. So it was really important to me in shaping where I would head. Now, after Brown, of course, I went to MIT as a postdoc in Ken Stevens' speech communication group in the research lab of electronics. And so Ken was a super important mentor to me, really broadened my knowledge of acoustics, and I had opportunities in that lab that I certainly had not had in the very small program at Brown. And then later, after my postdoc, I got my job here at UCLA, and that was under Peter Ladefoged. He had been the only phonetician faculty, and at some point, I mean, he had built an empire here, the big lab, many students, staff, and it was decided there should be a second faculty member, a young person under him. And so, of course, Peter was a wonderful mentor throughout my career, but especially in that early stage. I also had wonderful peers in graduate school at MIT and here at UCLA. I mean, there were so many people who shaped the kinds of things I was interested in and able to work on. I feel very lucky. I think that's true of so many people, senior in the field, that they've just had wonderful mentors at many crucial stages in their career. Oh, well, one thing that was really new and exciting at the time, I think, was that things were very interdisciplinary. There, of course, was the longstanding traditional field of phonetics, but experimental instrumental phonetics, at least in the United States, was a relatively new and exciting field, in part because you would reach out and work with people from other areas. And most notably for me, when I was in graduate school, there were psychologists working in speech perception. Providence, Rhode Island is not far from New Haven, Connecticut, and there were strong connections between Peter Imus and Haskins Labs. And so we were very lucky in linguistics to have Peter Imus and his group. Indeed, Francis Ganong was a member of my dissertation committee. So that was an interdisciplinary aspect to phonetics that I think was relatively new. I could be wrong about that. And then, of course, the interest in speech acoustics, detailed acoustic analysis of sounds, either because you were interested in how the sounds were perceived or just because you were interested in how sounds of languages are put together. And so Ken Stevens, Sheila Bloomstein was going up to Cambridge every week to work with Ken Stevens. And so we were very fortunate to have that influence very directly felt. Phil Lieberman was very familiar with Font's work. And so we had a feeling that the kind of phonetics we were doing was part of this much larger speech communication enterprise. Well, so I mentioned that the phonologist at Brown, Elon Drescher, really broadened my horizons about what phonetics could be like. And so I did a lot of early work on the phonetics of phonological contrasts, levels of abstraction in phonetic description. And those have been interests of mine throughout my career. I think some of the early questions I was wrestling with have reappeared in different forms throughout my career. One thing that was important to me at the time as a very early researcher, when I was a postdoc in Ken Stevens' lab, there were several other postdocs, and postdocs in his lab came from a variety of fields: engineering, speech communication, speech disorders broadly, different names for that field, psychology, and linguistics. And it seemed as if at least some of the other postdocs viewed being in the lab as an opportunity to move into industry, to not be academics, or if academics, to leave any linguistics they had once been studying behind. And when I came to realize this about the people around me, I thought, okay, no, I've got to, that's the pressure. That's how people are reacting to this environment. I've really got to keep aware of how to keep being a linguist. How can the work I do here be about linguistic phonetics and not a pathway into some whole other kind of career? And I think, again, that was a really important shaper of the kinds of questions I was interested in early on, which then kind of have lasted throughout my career. Well, most importantly, I think when I came to UCLA, where with Peter Ladefoged, where the tradition of descriptive phonetics as embodied in the IPA. This was alive and well. And in fact, my first term here, I was thrown into teaching the IPA. It was quite an eye opener that I realized, hey, that traditional phonetics that I thought was all settled and really wasn't interesting because there was nothing new to do. That's so not the case. Peter was a wonderful um, well, example of how you could continue to develop very traditional phonetics in the light of field work and other discoveries, but also integrating that with the kind of new direction in experimental phonetics. I should say that when I came and I was assigned to teach the traditional phonetics course using Peter's book, A Course in Phonetics. I was pretty nervous about that because I had not had that training myself in the program I'd been in. And I was just amazed that in the whole interview process for the job, no one had ever asked me if I had learned any of that or was capable of teaching it. So I kind of slipped under the radar on that. So I came to Los Angeles a month early, and I spent that month self-studying A Course in Phonetics. There were ancient cassette tapes that were used with the course. I listened to those obsessively, and my TA at the time, who was very experienced with the course, was super helpful. And so I survived that course. And it certainly led me to understand things that I didn't know about traditional phonetics, even if everybody else did. Well, at first I was not a member of the association. It was, some of you probably remember, a little bit moribund. So in the mid 80s, when Peter decided to reinvigorate the association by well, basically taking it over and making sure the council was full of people who were like actually alive, by, running new council elections and so on. So, as part of the team effort, I joined at that point. I wasn't directly involved. The big event of that decade, of course, that Peter organized was the Kiel Convention. I was unable to go to that because that was just when I was having a baby. So I missed out on that important moment in the association's history. But over time, I continued to be a member, and eventually, someone asked me if I would stand for a position on the council, and I did. So then I was a member of council. And then I guess, well, let me ask the next question. What executive positions did you have? As I mentioned, I was secretary from 2011 to 2015, and then president from 2015 to 2019. Since then, I've been on the council, but not in any executive position. So when I was secretary, my um, impressions about what the association who the association could be for kind of expanded because I was exposed to, um, well, one of the jobs of the secretary is to answer random emails from random people who have questions about phonetics. And you get suddenly a sense that there is a community out there of people interested in phonetics who are not professional phoneticians. Equally, I had to deal with some stuff on Wikipedia. Um, uh, Random editors writing weird stuff about the association and its alphabet. And that made me realize how many people were interested in phonetics in the Wikipedia community. And I also saw that the Wikipedia was using the IPA to show how to pronounce words that are part of the entries in the encyclopedia. So it made me realize that a lot of the interest in phonetics is not from professional phoneticians. And until then, I had really thought of the IPA as a professional organization serving professional phoneticians. And indeed, the membership is largely professional phoneticians. And having looked at the history a bit, you know, as soon as you look, you realize that, 100 years ago, the membership of the IPA was overwhelmingly language teachers, teachers of pronunciation, people who needed a tool to help them understand and teach pronunciation of foreign languages or their own language to foreigners. So as the association had changed and lost that constituency, we hadn't really added any other non-professional constituency. And it wasn't clear we really wanted phonetics hobbyists as members of the IPA itself, of the association, because what services would we offer them? Our main service is the journal, and that is typically not of interest to hobbyists. But it did make me feel that there were ways to reach out, social media, just at least trying to think of ways to serve this much broader community who are not phoneticians, but are interested in phonetics in some way. So it's the global phonetics community interpreted as the global community of people interested in phonetics who are not professional phoneticians. That really was a big change in my thinking about the association at that time. Well, as I mentioned, the Wikipedia community posed some problems, and the result of so there were so-called IPA charts posted on Wikipedia, which were not our chart in any way, shape, or form. And I went and tried to post our chart and couldn't do it because at that point our chart was copyrighted by the association, and Wikipedia only allows images to be posted if they're under a certain kind of Creative Commons license. So one thing I did was get the council to agree to change how we managed our chart and put it under a Creative Commons license, stopped calling it copyright, and then I could post it on Wikipedia. Also, because of this idea that anybody out there could post on Wikipedia what the IPA should be, I worked to clarify what does it mean to propose and have accepted a revision to the alphabet and the chart. Uh, I think it wasn't clear to people that there was actually a process. There was an association which had a process which could have as an outcome a change to the chart. So I tried to make that very clear both on Wikipedia and in our own documents that yes, it's possible to change the IPA, but there is a process to go through, and any proposed changes that haven't gone through that process are not official. So that was a kind of whole package of things: Wikipedia, Creative Commons, and then revising, not revising the chart, revising the metadata on the chart to keep it with a current date. I had read in Wikipedia discussions that these Wikipedia editors were thinking, oh, well, it's still dated 2005, so they must not care about it anymore. And it's like a free for all, up for grabs. So I had tried to then have the current year's date always on the chart so that they would know, yes, we do still care about our chart and maintain it. And we are the custodians of that chart. And this led to a kind of a bigger kind of question that's always an issue. The balance, trying to understand the balance between control of one's intellectual property and free use by all, free distribution and promulgation and use of that property. And there actually had been some opinions that we should try to somehow trademark. We should protect our property, but that's really at odds with making it freely available and encouraging people to use it. So I hope that what we're doing now is the right balance there. But it certainly was something we were wrestling with for a whole time there. Some other challenges that I faced on the executive, I was always considering how can we better serve our members, and that would in turn encourage people to join. And so it's a challenge to think of how to do that. And we were especially interested in encouraging students to join the association on the idea that that's the future of the profession and the association. So we started the IPA Student Awards. The association previously was funding students' attendance at ICFES because of the Justabrusa legacy gift. And so we were providing Justabrusa scholarships to students. And we just started matching that or exceeding that with IPA, with the association's own funds. And we extended that, ICFES is once every 4 years. And we decided to just start funding, allowing students to apply for funding for other conferences, workshops, meetings, whatever. And that has grown a lot after my time on the executive. We were kind of slow to grow, but it certainly was an important step in serving our members, especially our student members. I was interested, and this was perhaps more of a challenge, in involving the members of the council in the running of the association. When I first joined the council, I expected to be contacted by someone and asked how I would like to contribute and help. I thought I'd be presented with some committees I could join or some jobs I could do. No, nothing. We never heard anything. Maybe once a year there'd be a vote to take on something. So when I joined the executive, I thought, well, I was an eager young person. I was ready to help, but there was no structure for doing that. So I started committees or subcommittees, if you like, of council on aspects of the association's work where I thought the knowledge of more people would be helpful and also would make the council feel more connected with the association. And that structure has continued and grown a bit. And I think it's been really helpful in making the members of council feel that they are actively contributing to the association. I was also interested in our role in phonetics education. That's actually one of the committees that was set up. But a specific thing I was concerned about was that I knew that students in phonetics classes, not just phonetics students, but students taking a single course in phonetics, even undergraduates, um, were often interested in using our illustrations of the IPA. They're interested in the phonetics of a particular language, and there would exist an illustration, but the only way to get access to those was through the journal. And so a subscription or membership was needed to do that. And so as a professor, I would be there, downloading or Xeroxing these illustrations to give to students. And it seemed to me that we could really help education in phonetics by making these illustrations freely available. So this was a little more of a challenge because I went to Cambridge University Press, our publisher of the journal, and said, how can we make some or all of the illustrations freely available? And what we ended up working out was a 3-year window. So for the first 3 years of after publication, an illustration is limited to subscribers, members of the IPA, libraries, whatever. But after that, every illustration and its audio recordings become freely available. And so over time, this has amounted to a lot of illustrations being available to students. So while it was a challenge to get CUP to see that this wasn't going to hurt them, I think it was really important as a contribution of the association to the field. Another challenge that I faced on the executive, and which every executive continues to face, is keeping the membership dues fees low enough so that people who want to join can afford to do so. And we certainly wouldn't want anyone to give up their membership because of the cost. And IPA membership has always been relatively pretty inexpensive. But when I was on the executive, we um, confronted the issue of rising publication costs for print journals. We realized that by offering an online journal only form of membership, we could keep available a very low cost membership. And indeed, that's the structure of our student membership. The membership fee just covers the online access to the journal. And at the time, we offered as an option paying more to get a print journal, as many journals were doing. Now, like many journals, that's no longer an option, and that removes a lot of logistical challenges from running the journal and the association. But certainly the idea of trying to keep the dues as low as possible is always a challenge for every executive, and that was how we met it at the time. Another kind of challenge, not for the executive in terms of what we could do, but a challenge that became very clear when I was on the executive is the fundamental question of what the IPA, the alphabet, is for. The very first thing that I was tasked to do when I became secretary was to run a discussion and second voting on the question of whether the association should add a symbol for a low central vowel to the alphabet and to the chart. And so this was hotly debated within the council. And the clear difference of opinion across members of the council that became clear was some people thought the main goal of the IPA, the alphabet, was to represent contrasts in languages. And if no language had a three-way low vowel contrast, then there was no reason to have three low vowel symbols. On the other hand, other members felt that the purpose of the alphabet was to allow representation of phonetic detail, and as long as languages could systematically use different low vowel qualities within or across languages, there should be a way to represent that through basic symbols. There was no resolution to this. The proposal to add the symbol was defeated, I guess, showing that the view that the IPA is primarily about contrasts prevailed among the council members at that time. But this is something that will affect almost every proposal to revise or add to the alphabet. Well, I mentioned before that 100 and more than 100 years ago, the membership was largely language teachers, especially pronunciation teachers. And of course, so that was part of the mission of the IPA, was to assist that clientele. And that obviously is not really how we see our mission anymore. Um, and uh, if if there's a single way in which we've shifted our focus as to what we're trying to help, I would say if it is shifted from language teaching to language documentation, that we, as an association, see phonetics as providing really important tools for people who study and document individual languages, especially endangered languages. And so one of our committees, the committee I chair, founded and chair, is the Committee for Funding Work on Phonetic Documentation with a preference for endangered languages. So I could imagine, not that these field workers will necessarily join the association, but that we could come to see the fieldwork community as a constituency, a clientele, in the way that 100 years ago language teachers were seen as that. Another way in which the association has, the mission has changed is that despite the name International Phonetic Association, as everyone knows, originally the IPA was not very international at all. And indeed, in the late 20s, I guess it was, there was a conference to try to make the IPA really think internationally. And that's certainly been a change in the mission and a very successful one. Although the membership of the IPA is not as international as we might hope, that's again because it's largely professional phoneticians, and there are many countries where there just aren't professional phoneticians. But in terms of how the association views its role, I think that it really has become very international, again, through this interest in publishing illustrations of the IPA from around the world. I can refer you to Maria Tabane's wonderful map where you can see the locations of illustrations all over the world. And in encouraging international membership in any way that we can, including helping students from other countries attend our conference and so on. So becoming truly international, really feeling responsible for the sounds of all of the world's languages in our alphabet and charts, I think it's an evolution not in the intent, but certainly in the practice of what the IPA does. Well, I think it's fair to say these challenges are the same as for universities in general and humanities departments and divisions in particular. Um, so funding, uh, political pressures, so funding both within a university and extramurally, the problems of getting research funding from any and all sources is a challenge for phonetics as it's done today. Whether you're doing fieldwork or experiments, you're going to need some form of funding. The pressures to justify your existence through high enrollments are problems for some, though not all, linguistics and phonetics programs. Pressures, just as I said, that universities face in general. Specifically with respect to the IPA, the kind of phonetics that the IPA supports, I think the biggest challenge is that in general, I think it's fair to say there is less interest in phonetic transcription as a skill. I know that many American departments, linguistics departments, have modified their curricula to minimize or eliminate training in traditional ear training, phonetic transcription, and certainly in production, even though there's correspondingly a great increase in interest in fieldwork and language documentation. This isn't always supported by training in phonetics. And so it is a challenge for phonetics as a field, and perhaps for the IPA as a supporter of that field, to encourage programs to continue or to reinstate traditional phonetic training as, for example, a necessary tool in the toolbox of language documenting. So I think the major generally agreed upon milestones are well available in published or posted histories of the IPA. So I wanted to mention something that had struck me in doing some history of the IPA research, what I took to be a milestone for the IPA in the United States. And that is that in the 1920s, especially in the year 1927, the IPA was um, universally adopted for phonetic transcription in the United States. And specifically in 1927, the IPA was adopted by both the Modern Language Association and the National Association of Teachers. It was endorsed by Bloomfield in an article in Language. And in the 20s, it was decided that the IPA would be the basis for the phonetic transcription of the fieldwork that was done over the next decade for the Linguistic Atlas of New England. As I was a student, the IPA was not generally used in the United States. The Americanist tradition of transcription was very strong. And so I view this as the 1920s situation in the US was a big milestone for the IPA, even though it seems historically it was later retreated from. So maybe Jody can help me with this a bit for, say, a couple of things. I think the IPA provides basic descriptive tools, especially for clinical transcription of speech. And I was really heartened when I back when I was teaching a course in applied phonetics, and we would have visitors come in who used phonetics in their careers, in their daily life. And we had a clinician come in who told the students, I use the IPA every single day that I'm working. And I thought, bless you, bless you. That is just great. So that's clearly been a contribution. I think in a very different sense, the way the IPA pushes individual users to think cross-linguistically, to not just think about a few languages or even worse, just one language, is really valuable, that speech sciences have to embrace the idea that the human capability for speech goes beyond what any one language uses. And for better or for worse, the IPA has contributed, I would say, a set of assumptions about the nature of speech as embodied in the segmental transcription system and its diacritics. And that set of assumptions is ready to be adopted and embraced or challenged as the individual decides. But certainly having that on the table, I think, has been a real contribution to speech sciences.
I agree with all of that, and I might kind of tie the things together by suggesting that IPA, the alphabet, and the association too, provide a backbone to speech sciences. In speech sciences, when you think about the way that people describe or study different disorders, it gets very fuzzy. It's not grounded often in a solid theoretical body of understanding or of it just there's not a lot of theory. And there's a lot of good description, but the IPA is structured and formally developed and rigorous, and that's something that speech sciences need more of. And I think to the extent that the work on perception of voices and of disordered speech has progressed, it's been in part because there is this backbone there that you can rely on for giving some rigor to your descriptions.
Okay, thank you. This is always a crystal ball kind of question, and of course, no one really knows. But I would assume that we'll see, as we are seeing now, continuing development of computational modeling as a very important, not just tool in phonetics, but an approach which will encourage more theorizing and then empirical testing of the models that are developed. My own view is that right now we're kind of under theorized, and computational modeling forces you to examine your assumptions as you go to about implementing them. And so I hope that this will deepen our general approach to the study of speech sounds. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, not really. I share your feeling that it's we all think this. It's really, really hard to know where the next idea is going to come from. And someone thinks of something and suddenly everything makes a right turn. So that can happen anytime. And even if it doesn't have to be a big idea. It can just be somebody tweaks something and suddenly, half the discipline is undermined. So yeah, very hard to know. As long as there are clever people with enthusiasm working in the field, it'll go somewhere. That's for sure. It's not moribund.
It'll go somewhere.
Yeah. Some fields you kind of wonder, but not phonetics.
I don't have much to say about this. I would say that we, the IPA, we provide important tools for users of phonetics, people who are incidentally or centrally looking at speech sounds in their various disciplines. And I think of it as, in return for providing these tools, we get new ways to address key questions in phonetics.
I have a thought on
Yeah.
this. It
Okay.
kind of leads into the next question, which is what are some of the most exciting interdisciplinary connections you
Right.
have seen in
Right.
phonetics? One thing about interdisciplinary collaboration, I don't know that you can foster it other than by being receptive to the products of interdisciplinary work in your journal, at your meetings,
Mm,
by making people from different disciplines welcome, encouraging them to submit. Then people get together and talk to each other, and the
mm,
collaborations form naturally through
mm,
shared interests, rather than saying, we're going to invite these guest speakers from this other area to come and talk to us. That doesn't really work. What you
mhm.
want is the, well, like the whole collaboration you and Abir and I had,
Yeah.
that just happened.
Yeah.
And it happened partly because there were outlets where we could publish the work we did together,
Mm,
that were
that's the way of thinking.
interested in the multiple perspectives.
Yeah, the thing I was going to say about this was I had already mentioned back when I was beginning in the 1970s some what at the time were exciting interdisciplinary connections for phonetics. And later in my career, I've been very lucky to work with psychologists, but especially with Jody in the medical school and Abir Alwan in electrical engineering. And so our work for me has been the most exciting interdisciplinary connections that I personally have seen or experienced in phonetics. Well, I think it's quite possible the IPA will become more clearly international. And one thing that springs to my mind in this respect is uh, when I was, in the executive, the effort we started, which I believe continues, to make available IPA charts with the meta text in many different languages. So, not IPA charts limited to the symbols needed to transcribe some particular language, but the descriptive terminology, the row and column labels, and other identifiers of the symbols are given in languages that are used in the teaching of phonetics. And so I think that I hope that makes people around the world feel that the IPA is more theirs than perhaps they did when the only version of the IPA chart available was in English. So I think that kind of more international focus, and I've already mentioned a growing number of illustrations of the IPA in general, just make it's been evolving over the 140 years and continues to evolve, that the IPA's perspective becomes ever more international. I think it would be a plus to collaborate with other societies, other professional societies that would help the IPA promote phonetics beyond its traditional home base. To some extent, I think the IPA already does this through the ICFIS conferences because many different disciplines are represented at the ICFIS conferences. They're by no means linguistics conferences. Um, on the other hand, because there are so many adjacent science areas, societies, the IPA doesn't need to try to itself represent these other areas. There are so many societies already doing a good job of representing their areas. I think the IPA does need to take care to focus on its unique core, but that doesn't preclude, as I say, collaborating with these other societies that are already representing these other non traditional aspects of phonetic or speech research more generally. First, read widely and historically.
Please, please.
Please. Don't just read what you need for your next class or assignment. Um, and as you read, ask yourself, what next? What would come next after this work? So as you read, you're not just absorbing what's been done, but you're trying to project the future of a research program around that particular work. Even if you're not going to engage with that at all, it's just really good um, training, self-training to be able to think that way, that you're not just there to get what they have to offer, but to think, how would I move this forward if I were so inclined? The other advice I would give, and this had already come up a bit in an earlier answer, is what I would call find a dream team. Find colleagues. They don't have to be at your own institution, though that's certainly convenient. Colleagues somewhere that who have a slightly different expertise from you, and that the overlap of your expertise with theirs can suggest shared research questions that need all of your joint expertises to address. And because of that need for a wide range of expertise, probably are not being addressed already. Finding a dream team to collaborate with can be a very happy experience and a very social experience, and is a nice counter to the sit alone and read widely and historically advice that's also so important. Yeah. Jody, you have any advice?
I agree 100%. It's so much more fun when there's other people to talk to and bounce ideas off of, and when their perspectives are different than yours, it makes such a difference. And yeah, I've had a highly collaborative career, and I think that's one reason why I've been so happy in my work. I never think that someone can't be your collaborator or doesn't have something to offer. Language is everywhere. It's woven into every aspect of human experience. And you just never know who's going to have an idea that's going to kind of ring something in your head. So don't assume that just because it's a lawyer or an engineer that
or a musicologist.
Or a musicologist, yeah, or God forbid, a head and neck surgeon, that you don't assume that they don't have something that's going to be really valuable and that's going to pull you down a path that you just fall in love with and you're happy forever after.
We should all be so lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might add something someone once said to me that they tell their students. Well, two things that I've heard from other people. One is make a 5-year plan. It can be associated with applying for extramural funding, but at any one point, if you have a 5-year plan, you'll feel more secure in what you're doing, even understanding that that plan could change in response to the developments of your research or meeting colleagues that you'd like to collaborate with. For the student, a young researcher who's a student who is looking for an advisor, someone once told me they always tell their students, find 2 advisors, again, with slightly different expertises, and your research fits in where their expertises overlap, because that is very likely to be new research questions, new approaches to old questions.
I might add one more, which is never stop asking why. Don't be satisfied with describing the previously undescribed language or doing your statistical test and reporting the values. You've got an answer to your hypothesis, but why that answer? Why not some other answer? Where, as Pat said, to take the things you read and see where does that go next? It's a very similar kind of question because most of the good questions are why questions, in my opinion, and they don't get asked as often as they should.
Yeah.
I've rejected a lot of papers that I don't know why they did this and why the results happened. I know what they found. I just don't know why I should care about it.
Right.
So always remember to do that.
Right. Well, so I'm not going to answer this about actually currently, as in right now at this moment, but I'll just answer personally that for the past 15 years, I've primarily worked on voice, on phonation, uh, because at that time, it was clearly a less studied area of linguistic phonetics. And I found a dream team that allowed me to work in that area solidly within linguistics, but with a very interdisciplinary perspective. And I really felt like I was breaking some new ground there. And as it happens now, several of my students continue to work in this area. So now I don't feel that it's an underexplored area at all, the linguistics of phonation, of voice. But at the time, it was that feeling of, oh, here's something new. And the way to address it was to find collaborators who could help me see it in a new way. Well, I have two answers for that. I'm sure there are many others possible, but the obvious one is to contribute your research to JIPA, to the Journal of the IPA. For example, students often submit illustrations of the IPA, but also research articles. Obviously, the future of the IPA is partly the future of its journal, and so the more good stuff comes across the editorial desk, the better off we are. But if you wanted to be involved directly in the association, I think it's completely fine. You look at the list of committees that the IPA has. These are made up of members of the council, the 30-member council of the IPA, on a variety of committees. Each committee has a chair, and I think you should feel free to contact that committee chair, say you're interested in the work of this committee, and is there any way you can become involved directly? And in the committees that I have chaired on a couple of them, we have had students involved either ad hoc or briefly or more extensively. We haven't made any concerted effort to kind of institutionalize that, but I think most committee chairs would respond positively, especially if you have a particular skill that you would bring to the table that that committee would benefit from.
And for junior faculty as well, not just students.
Right.
Yeah, it's helpful when you're going for, at least at UCLA, going for promotion to have involvement with uh, scholarly organizations and showing leadership and volunteer work. So that's and it's fun. It's interesting. You get to meet people. So people who
Right.
may have valuable ideas that you can work with.
Right. Okay. So one of the major uses of its money that the IPA has is the continuing support of ICFAS, and both in terms of direct support of the conference costs, but also the thousands of pounds, euros, dollars of student awards that are made. And I think this is already very valuable support for young researchers. Now, this is primarily focused on graduate students, and so you could imagine that it would be ideal if this kind of support could extend past graduate student time into the early post-PhD career, since new PhDs often face greater financial challenges than graduate students do because their sources of support have been often cut off. Um, I don't know if the IPA has the money to do that kind of extended support, but clearly it would be something to consider. Um, Now, one of the huge challenges that young researchers face is getting jobs, and I'm not sure how the IPA can help with that directly, but by supporting careers in general, perhaps it would make it easier for people to get jobs. And one possible way, again, this is all if the IPA had a lot of money just sitting around waiting for a use. One of the other big challenges for young researchers is getting research support, extramural or even intramural grants. And of course, getting a grant is very helpful then in getting a job. So if it were possible for the IPA to provide even small amounts of seed money for new immediate post PhD research projects, that could certainly help support young researchers' careers a lot. We're asked whether the IPA should play a stronger role in mentoring. Mentoring, of course, would be great, especially for help with phonetic fieldwork and also help in preparing research proposals. Again, in practice, I just don't know how practical this is because most members, professor and other senior members of the association are already pretty focused on their own students and postdocs. So it's not obvious that there's a great pool of mentors out there waiting to be tapped. But to the extent there is, yes, that would be a really valuable service that the IPA could consider offering. Now, I'd say that aside from the mentoring angle, the Acoustical Society of America provides a model for how an association, a society, a large society with professional staff, to be sure. So this is different, but still, they have a pretty comprehensive program of providing lots of activities for students, both in the society and at meetings. And they also do provide a couple of early career awards, money grants, competitive. So there certainly are ways that the IPA could reach out to help young researchers more, but to the extent that those require money or the time of professional volunteers, it would remain to be seen how practical that would be.
I think the ASA, a couple of the scholarships were endowed.
This is true.
Yeah.
And the IPA has only the Eustace Student
Right.
Awards for ICFIS travel. That's the only endowment we
Yeah.
have. Yeah.
If a campaign were established and
Remember us in your will.
not necessarily
Yeah.
that, but send us $50,
Uh,
you would get some response. And if that over a period of years, it
Yeah.
could develop an endowment. I mean, if you let it be known that you are interested, that you are trying to form more endowed support for student development and student support,
Mhm.
then people will think of it. When I'm thinking about, oh, it's Christmas time, I'm writing all those checks. The IPA does not spring into my mind.
Right.
So,
And we don't have a button on our website that you can just
right.
click and donate.
So,
Right.
you don't have to do it. It doesn't have to be one big gift. It
Yeah,
can be something
that's
that you
true.
just make a priority and make
Fund.
people aware of, and it happens over time.
Right. Maybe the laws and structures in the UK, which is where we're incorporated, are different. But here, the Acoustical Society has a foundation which
Right.
handles and manages the charitable donations.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something to think about. The only time we do fundraising is in connection with ICFIS. When you register for ICFIS, you have the option of adding an additional payment, which will go for student support. And we just spend that money out. We don't
Yeah.
bank that. We're not building an endowment.
Yeah.
We're just,
Yeah, well, that's
yeah,
the intent of the donors at the time.
right,
So,
right.
yeah.
Support students right now for this
Yes.
conference. Right.
It doesn't mean you can't have other intentions,
Right, right.
secret plots, things like that.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm of two minds about this question. So, just taking it at face value, I could say that in the US, in linguistics, it would seem right now that sociophonetics, fieldwork or language documentation, and computational methods are often sought after for phonetics positions or positions that involve phonetics. I'm just saying from what you can see by looking at ads, job ads over the last few years. So, yes, if your main focus is choosing an area that's likely to be more employable, then those are directions to go into, and that's fine. I should also say there's clearly also a secondary interest within language departments hiring in applied linguistics, so L2 pronunciation research. That's another career path, I guess. But I'm not sure we should all be thinking about what's the most employable thing to study and all do that. I think you should identify something that you think is important and exciting and turn this around. You will have to do the work to sell that topic to potential employers as being worth having in their program, in their department, that this is worth hiring someone who does what you find exciting and interesting. And I know that sometimes it's very hard for students. They're very excited by what they're doing, but they have trouble explaining it to other people. Well, that's just got to be, if you're not going in one of these easy directions that people are already saying they're looking to hire, then the burden's on you to convince people that what you're doing is just as valuable and desirable. Well, I assume there'll be a lot like the challenges that past IPA presidents have faced, though in different in detail. So one issue is that the IPA is a small and all volunteer organization. There's no staff to sustain initiatives or to support the executive in what they're doing. Um, and part of this is that we do try to keep the dues absolutely as low as they could be, but at the expense of not growing an organization. So it's always a challenge when you have ideas of things you'd like to get done, but you have to find volunteers to take those on and help you with them. That's a very limited pool in the world of at least academia, where everyone is so very busy. It can just be hard to get busy academics to step up and serve um, a professional organization. I know every journal has the same problem finding reviewers, editors, and so on. So that thinking creatively about well, how much can I myself do as as the president? How can I inspire other people to help with this? And looking to students to help with things can be helpful. Everyone has some kind of financial challenge, and I believe right now, and presumably for the next few years, the main challenge has to do with going to an open access model for the journal. And this is presumably requires new approaches to thinking about revenue and therefore budgeting. But as I say, every organization, every officer always has some kind of financial challenge. But it's because of the requirement that you just completely rethink the budgeting model of your association that we didn't rush to do this and other societies haven't rushed to do it. And then finally, I just say we think of challenges as putting out fires, things that come up that have to be dealt with. But just say that it's because of that, it is then a challenge to find the space to find small ways to make things better. It can't all be putting out fires, but you have to work in between those fires and think, well, what could I do right now that's small that would make things better for the association and its members? And an example of this for me would be when I got the Journal of the Acoustical Society to update its specifications for fonts for phonetic symbol use in manuscripts submitted to the journal. They were requiring a legacy font that was hardly available and was not Unicode compliant. And I worked with the society to get them to just change that. And now, yeah, so modern Unicode fonts, phonetic symbols are now what you're supposed to use. So this is just a question of kind of looking around, where's a small bit of pain that I could relieve through just a small amount of work. And as I say, the challenge then is finding a way to make time for those small bits of improvement. Well, this actually, my answer here mimics my answer to an earlier question. It would be really nice, but I don't think it's realistic for a small organization with a single president who is a volunteer, or so a single officer in president, or by having a new committee. I think there's just a limited bandwidth that people have for these essentially volunteer activities. Um, if the IPA wanted to go in this direction, and I should say in other societies, this work is done a lot by the professional full-time staff who have the time to keep in touch with outreach and political issues that arise across societies. Now, the IPA currently has one vice president whose job is to be the liaison with the ICFIS organizers and to find to encourage other future ICFIS sponsors to put in bids to host ICFIS. And that's probably enough work for that person. Maybe if the person in that office had a lot of spare time, they might want to take on other external outreach public activities. The alternative might be to have a second vice president position called an external vice president whose whole mission would be connecting the society up with the association with other societies and public issues. Um, but again, I don't know how easy it would be to find someone to take on that kind of job in addition to whatever their career um, duties are.
Anything else you want to say about past, present, or future of the IPA or the field of phonetics?
Nope.
Okay.
Okay. And